Hello, welcome back. Today we're taking the next big step in our grid portraits, and to start this off, much like the grid that I made on top of the photograph, I'm making another grid. This time on top of a large piece of paper because I'm going to scale up my portrait. Um, if you don't want to scale up your portrait, you want to do it on the same size paper as the photograph is on, that's totally fine. In that case, you're going to make the exact same grid that you put on top of the photograph, a half-inch grid, um, making a mark and measuring every half an inch around your paper. Since I'm scaling mine up, I'm making a 1-inch grid, so my portrait will be twice as big as the photograph that I'm working from. So I measured around the edge of my paper, made a mark every inch, and I did that on every single side of the paper so that when I lay my ruler across, I can make an exactly perfect straight line. Uh, the straighter that you make your line, and the more diligent that you are about lining up those marks that you made for your grid, the easier it will be to translate your portrait from photograph to paper. And my paper is a little bit bigger than my ruler, going the long ways. So what I'm doing is I put a marks every inch on one of the lines in the center so that I can keep my lines exactly straight because I really want perfect straight grid so that I can have a really easy time when I'm drawing my image. Once your grid lines get wonky, it really messes up the whole thing. So if you're going to put in any time here, make sure that it's making those straight grid lines because you will thank yourself for it. Almost there. All right. So there we go, a giant grid. It ends up being the same number of boxes as my small grid. It's just twice the size. So what's important is that you're working with the same number of squares inside of your grid. That way you can capture that exact image. So when I look at my photograph that has the corresponding grid on it, I'm using that photograph to draw what I see inside of each square and how it relates to the lines that I've made. And what I did right here was I just noticed that I skipped a square, and I just figured it out. So I'm taking my eraser, I'm going back in and I erased the drawing that I made. I'm going to fix that up because it's no big deal. I just need to move everything up a square right now so that I can keep my image on track. So I'm starting with the contour lines. I'm defining the form, basically doing an outline of the shapes that I'm seeing inside of the photograph. So I'm not worried too much about shading at first. I'm really just trying to block in with pencil line those those outlines and just get the general shape of the figure. And I'm drawing pretty light, so if I do make any mistakes, it'll be easy for me to erase. And I made my grid lines super, super light because in the end, where there's any white spots on my portrait, I do want to be able to erase my grid lines without any trouble. I don't want to have sort of a really deep impression if I try to erase a really light area. Yeah, so I'm just taking my time and methodically checking where each line and each shape of the face and the glasses now um, are hitting those small grid lines that I made on the photograph, and trying to match them as best I can on my large drawing. And again, if you're working on a paper that's the same size as your photograph, that's no big deal. It'll be the exact same method, uh, just trying to copy what you see box for box inside of those grid lines. So some areas, like you can see, like around the eyes, I did put a little shading in where it's really dark in the photograph, and maybe I can't see exactly where the lines are, and I can just see that there's some heavy shadows right there. I did fill that in a little bit, but mostly I'm just trying to do the outlines, not really using any shading. Mostly just building up the forms with line, and I'll save the shading for when I go back in next time and add a little more contrast to this portrait. So I'm really just focusing on the contour, the outline, and getting those lines where they need to be to match my photograph. So I am coming to the end of my drawing for the day. I'm gonna leave it at the contours, and like I said, save the shading and more details for next time. If I'm gonna add color, I'll do that next time. But right now, just blocking in those forms, and I had a without that one hiccup in the beginning, a pretty simple time of it because I took my time to make my grid lines super straight and precise.